Yesterday should be known later this week. The 64-year-old Karrabee went down minutes after competing in the Sydney Harbour ferry race. Passengers and crew had to jump ashore to safety.
At the start, it was just the same as every other great ferry race. The graceful ladies of the harbour jammed with people and festooned in a rainbow of colour. Karrabee was riding considerably lower in the water, and passengers said she was taking water as she ploughed through the swell. Down the final stretch, and Karrabee didn't seem to be showing any signs of slowing, managing to grab third place behind Lady Cutler and Lady McKell. With the race over, it was back to Circular Quay. But as we pulled into the dock, it was clear something was terribly wrong with Karrabee, her stern well below the waterline. With passengers still on board, Karrabee listed severely, then went down like a stone. Urban Transport Authority officials attempted to stop our crew filming, and we were quickly ushered off the dock. Throughout the night, Maritime Services Board officials have been working on salvaging the Karrabee. Divers have been checking the extent of the damage and how the vessel might be raised to the surface. An oil boom has been placed around the dock to contain the thousands of gallons of fuel which has seeped out of the vessel's tanks. Jim Rudder reporting.
One of 5 ferries competing in the race and was under the command of veteran seaman Ron Archer. The ferry's troubles started 2/3 of the way through the race when she was disabled through a steering malfunction. The problem was quickly rectified and Karrabee rejoined the race, but then it was discovered she was taking water. Skipper Archer realised the seriousness of the problem as Karrabee completed the course and immediately radioed for pumps to be standing by at Circular Quay jetty. While passengers were rushed ashore, attempts were being made to keep the ferry afloat, but they were to no avail and Karrabee sank in 12 metres of water. Port authorities and representatives of the Urban Transit Authority immediately began an inquiry into the sinking while plans were being made to raise the vessel.
Called an immediate inquiry into yesterday's sinking of a Sydney ferry. The 64-year-old Karrabee went to the bottom after coming third in the annual Sydney Harbour ferry race.
At the start, it was just the same as every other great ferry race. The graceful ladies of the harbour jammed with people and festooned in a rainbow of colour. Karrabee was riding considerably lower in the water, and passengers said she was taking water as she ploughed through the swell. Down the final stretch, and Karrabee didn't seem to be showing any signs of slowing, managing to grab third place behind Lady Cutler and Lady McKell. With the race over, it was back to Circular Quay. But as we pulled into the dock, it was clear something was terribly wrong with Karrabee, her stern well below the waterline. With passengers still on board, Karrabee listed severely, then went down like a stone. Today, all that can be seen of the Karrabee is her funnel and mast as she rests in 10 metres of water. Throughout the night, divers have been trying to secure 2 chains under her hull so she can be lifted out by crane later today. In the meantime, Maritime Services Board officials are trying to clean up the thousands of gallons of fuel which have seeped from the vessel's tanks. This is Jim Rudder reporting.
Just found out that the divers down here have been working all night. They've been working in relays. The initial job that they were doing was going down into the ferry and apparently plugging up all the fuel lines and things like that to stop any pollution or to minimise pollution. Down there on the harbour now we can see the big orange boom that they have around the ferry to stop the oil from going out into the harbour. Since then they've been running high pressure hoses down into the mud, blasting the mud out from underneath the ferry, trying to get slings underneath because they believe this is going to be the quickest way that they can get the ferry back to the surface. They'll put these big webbing slings under the ferry, bring the Titan, a large floating crane in and try to bring her up to the surface that way. If that doesn't work, they've got to go to airbags and things like that. But at this stage, they're well on with the job and we may well see the Karrabee back on the surface within 24, 48 hours.
Fine, Rob. Rob, I must ask one question which I don't fully understand. How can a ferry that carries and commutes so many people daily sink so quickly?
Well, Carrie Ann, in looking at the situation, she's a very old ferry. She was built in 1913. She's a timber-hulled vessel, and it was quite rough out here yesterday. She had probably maximum load on board, and what it appears happened, she had a steering problem early. She's probably sprung planks or the caulking that goes between the planks to stop the water from getting into the hull. As she's pushed on, that's become worse and worse, and when she got back to the dock, it was just beyond help.
Well, it seems that those things perhaps should be checked a little bit more often, because it could have turned into a terrible tragedy. But we've got to leave it there, Rob. Thank you.
Okay, Carrie Ann.
Great for you keeping your eye on all things water.
Too much water during the event, and evacuation pumps were useless in keeping the ferry afloat. It was a race to get everyone off in time. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Well before dawn this morning, divers were already in the harbour looking at ways of raising the sunken vessel. Eventually, floats will be attached to the hull and the Karrabee will return to the surface. A full investigation into the sinking is well underway.
It's pretty clear that she took water over the bow. I think the press photos this morning showed that quite clearly, and a lot of water went in there at the latter part of the race. The boat was in good condition, just been certified, and we'll endeavour to see that the thing is conducted as properly and as orderly as we can. That's what we always have done.
At this stage, it doesn't look like the Karrabee will be raised before tomorrow. Only after she is brought to the surface will investigators be able to determine exactly what went wrong. Jim Rudder, National...
Divers worked around the clock to prepare Karrabee for the delicate lift to the surface. There was increasing concern that the ageing hull would break up. The ferry has settled into 2 metres of mud alongside the jetty at Circular Quay and is almost completely submerged in 12 metres of water. A short time ago, the divers completed the task of positioning 2 slings under the hull. The plan is to bring the huge floating crane Titan into position above the hull and lift it to the surface. But the mud that now envelops the hull could cause major problems. It will create an enormous suction on Karrabee as she is raised and may cause her to break up. At the same time, the pressure of these slings crushing against the side of the vessel could also cause considerable damage. If Karrabee starts breaking up, salvage experts will have to reconsider their recovery plans. They will probably use airbags to break the suction. The floating crane is expected to be brought into Circular Quay early tomorrow. If everything goes to plan, Karrabee could be on the surface later in the day. Then large pumps, expected to be supplied by the Navy, will be used to pump out the hull while divers try to find the cause of the sinking. As the divers worked today and the initial inquiry began, tributes were being paid to the master and crew of Karrabee. Maritime officials praised their efficiency in getting the ferry alongside the dock and guiding all passengers ashore before Karrabee sank.
And Rob is with our Live Eye unit at Circular Quay right now. Rob, what's the latest situation?
Well, Tim, they've just finished working down here, the divers that is, but the noise we hear in the background are Maritime Service Board workers breaking up the oil as it comes to the surface out of the ferry's tanks. There's also pieces of debris coming to the surface here, life jackets and other items, and they're collecting those and taking them over to the wharf. A few minutes ago, we spoke to one of the divers from the diving company operating or doing the job on getting Karrabee to the surface. He tells us it's been a very difficult job getting the slings underneath the hull, but he's confident that Karrabee will be on the surface by late tomorrow. They're going to be back down here about 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. They'll be using airbags, after all, putting them inside the hull and inflating them. And then at 10 o'clock, the big floating crane, the Titan, will move into position, and she'll pick up the slings that they've put under the hull here today and hopefully go from there and get the boat onto the surface. By late tomorrow, we could well see the Karrabee out of the dock here and both these jetties down here at Circular Quay back into service. But it's been a very good day. They're very pleased with the way things have gone. It hasn't been easy working in the mud and zero visibility down there, but they are confident they'll get the boat back on the surface by tomorrow afternoon.
Rob, so, have they stopped working there tonight, or are they going to carry on while there's still some light?
No, they've just finished, Tim, and they're trying, they've gone away now. They'll be back at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the only people working here tonight will be MSB people breaking up this pollution and collecting things as they float to the surface.
Okay.
Special investigation into the sinking of the Sydney Harbour ferry Karrabee, shortly after it berthed at the end of yesterday's Great Ferry Race. Salvage crews have worked throughout the day preparing for the delicate task of raising the vessel, which is expected to take place tomorrow.
The Karrabee, just back from an extensive refit, sank moments after tying up at Circular Quay number 4 wharf. With 350 passengers aboard, the Karrabee had just finished third in the Great Ferry Race, one of the feature attractions in the Sydney Festival. The Urban Transit Authority isn't saying much, but in a statement today it indicated the ferry master had expressed concern about the amount of water his vessel was taking aboard during the race, and he was instructed to return to the quay immediately. The UTA says at no time were passengers' lives endangered. A preliminary theory about the cause of the accident suggests the vessel's wooden hull may have split during the ferry race, and with all the water turbulence, the Karrabee's pumps were unable to cope with the flooding. By 11 last night, a private firm of diving contractors was on the scene preparing to effect a salvage. They continued throughout today, enlisting the aid of our national airline Qantas, which supplied a number of inflatable rubber buoys to be placed inside the stricken vessel prior to its refloating. The heavy-duty naval crane HMAS Titan will also be brought around from Garden Island Dockyard to assist with the salvage. Despite media being kept well away from the salvage operation, a UTA spokesman denies any attempt to maintain an air of secrecy about the incident.
We've been quite prepared to tell people what would happen, but you must remember that the incident now is the subject of an inquiry, which means that we won't be commenting any further on the incidents because that's a matter for the inquiry to determine.
Workmen completed preparations late this afternoon before a large crowd of spectators, and an attempt will be made to raise the vessel tomorrow morning. David Reid for 7 National News.
That quite clearly, and a lot of water went in there at the latter part of the race. The boat was in good condition, just been certified, and we'll endeavour to see that the thing is conducted as properly and as orderly as we can. That's what we always have done.
The Maritime Services Board is conducting a full inquiry into the sinking. Spokesman John Casson says the board will be moving to ensure there's never a repeat of the incident.
We simply find out why she sank. We do believe that she took water during the race. If that's the case, I'm sure the board would be looking at for next year to ensure that something is done to prevent this type of incident again. If she'd gone down under the harbour bridge where the water is something like 200 feet deep, we could have had a major disaster, and we just aren't going to allow that to happen.
The salvage operation is a difficult one. Today, divers used high-pressure hoses to dig 2 channels through the mud underneath the vessel. This allows heavy-duty cables to be slung around the hull to form a stirrup. Hopefully, the vessel will then be lifted to the surface using the huge floating crane, Titan.
Late tomorrow morning, Titan will be brought around from Cockatoo Island and manoeuvred into position for the lift. Once the Karrabee has been lifted to the surface, a high-capacity pump will empty the vessel. Despite the salvage operation, ferry services are only suffering minor disruptions. Jim Rudder, National 9
of the Karrabee, and the state opposition has called for a strict passenger limit on all Sydney Harbour ferries. Opposition spokesman Mr Max Smith claimed today that there had been a number of incidents over the past 2 years of ferries being dangerously overloaded. However, the Urban Transit Authority said the Karrabee had not been carrying too many people during yesterday's ferry race. The Karrabee sank at Circular Quay shortly after finishing third in the event. An attempt will be made tomorrow morning to lift her from the harbour bed using cables slung around her hull.
Divers worked all day using compressed air to clear passageways through the 2 metres of mud 10 metres down. They gradually slid 2 cables, one fore and one aft, under and around the hull. There was the job too of breaking up the diesel fuel seeping from the ferry's tanks. According to the Urban Transit Authority, the accident was most likely the result of a combination of factors. Boats travelling at speed close together created enough turbulence to send masses of water over the bow and into the hull. The ferry, the authority says, wasn't overloaded. In fact, the Karrabee had just recently been refitted and re-licensed to carry more than 600 passengers. Maritime Services Board officials want to inspect the hull tomorrow to work out what the inquiry will be looking for. The MSB says at this stage it's all a bit of a mystery. Waterproof bulkheads, fitted throughout the vessel to prevent it sinking in the event of collision, should have stopped water coming over the bow and into the hull from reaching the other end of the ferry.
Until we have a look at the hull, we won't know, but certainly when it's raised, we'll be able to tell you exactly what happened.
Does the incident raise any doubts about the safety of ferries?
None whatsoever.
Divers have yet to fit air cushions around the hull before Cockatoo Island's floating crane, the Titan, is called in to slowly raise the Karrabee to water level, when the pumps can take over the job.
Is back on the waters of Sydney Harbour. A two-day operation to pull her from the harbour bottom at Circular Quay reaped success this afternoon. The Karrabee sank on Sunday, only minutes after offloading 350 passengers at the end of the annual ferry boat race. It was an accident that cost the Urban Transit Authority tens of thousands of dollars. And Brady Halls reports that as the Karrabee was being refloated, allegations of negligence were also being raised.
Just after 3 o'clock, giant slings under the ferry were lifted by the Cockatoo Island crane Titan. After 2 days submerged in the green waters of Circular Quay, the Karrabee faced the light of day. Although some of the vessel's wood was splintered and windows smashed, damage was surprisingly minimal. The bilge pumps were set working again and the old lady floated on her own. The raising climaxed 2 days of work involving up to 100 men. After yesterday's preparations for the Herculean effort, the Titan moved into place right on 10 a.m. Divers went down, secured cables from the crane to the ferry and got ready for the big lift. It was a spectacle attracting at least 2,000 people. They crammed wharves, Circular Quay railway station and the overpass. They set up chairs, some even took risks. If the UTA had sold tickets, it could have covered the cost of raising the ferry. And while Circular Quay was abuzz with activity, there was plenty of action in Macquarie Street. Opposition leader Nick Greiner is alleging a massive cover-up surrounding the sinking. He says the UTA knew there was a defect with the ferry days before the race. Board denies the charge.
That the vessel was not issued with a defect notice. In fact, it was issued with a notice that said it had no deficiencies.
Tonight the ferry will be moored at the UTA's Balmain depot, where an extensive inspection and renovation will be carried out. As for the ferry competing in next year's race, or if there'll be a race next year, that's something the UTA doesn't want to talk about at the moment. Brady Halls, Eyewitness.
Back on top of the water tonight. She was raised after a lengthy salvage operation this afternoon and has now been towed to the Urban Transit Authority's repair docks at Balmain. The Karrabee sank on Sunday after taking part in the Sydney ferry boat race. A detailed inspection of the ferry to help find the reason for its sinking is already underway.
After a day and a half of preparations, the huge floating crane Titan was towed around from Cockatoo Island at 10 o'clock this morning. Slowly it was manoeuvred into position. The giant arm was swung around to a point directly above the sunken ferry. Since yesterday, salvage divers have been drilling 2 channels through the mud underneath the vessel. Heavy steel cables from the crane were fed through these channels, a slow and tedious process. The operation was further delayed by a threatened demarcation dispute between 3 shipping unions and the Navy. After hasty talks, the dispute was resolved, the salvage going ahead. With the cradle secured, Titan was ready for the mammoth lift. Centimetre by centimetre, she was raised. The familiar blue and white funnel of Karrabee was the first to break the surface. Thousands had gathered at the quay to witness the ferry re-emerge. Before long, the top deck was clear and the water just poured out. As she rose to uncover the main deck, the strain on both Titan and Karrabee was clear. The huge crane was listing over severely, while there were fears the upper structure of the ferry would give way, her wooden roof cracking under the tension of the cables. Once at water level, high-capacity pumps were brought in to remove the remaining water trapped in the hull. Access to lower decks was limited, salvage workers having to smash windows. Before long, the vessel had been almost completely drained, officials making their first inspection of the damage. The ferry skipper, Ron Archer, was also on board, the Karrabee in a vastly different state to when he last stood on the deck. Only an hour after the lift began, Karrabee was floating alone, the heavy steel cables from the Titan released.
Salvage officials are as surprised as anyone with the ease with which the Karrabee was raised. Damage appears to be minimal, and overall the operation has been a total success.
It was the results of the planning and the management today has shown that a dedicated group of people, if they think it through, can carry out what appeared to be almost an impossible task and make it very easy.
Only an hour ago, Karrabee was towed out of Circular Quay by 2 fireboats. To ensure the vessel stayed afloat, pumps were kept going in the ferry's hull as she was taken to Balmain. There at the Urban Transit Authority's repair yard, a full inspection will be made. the findings to be released in a Maritime Services Board report. After that, a decision will be made as to whether the Karrabee will go back into service. Jim Rudder, National 9 News.
Was being carried out today. State Opposition leader Nick Greiner made serious allegations about